Matt Rhule's progress, Colorado, the portal, NIL. We tackle it all with a special guest next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasting on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
All right, good Friday morning. I'm Mitch Sherman. Connor Happer is here. We have a guest today, Max Olson. Welcome in.
What up?
My colleague in covering college football for The Athletic. Max is a national writer, covers everything related to the transfer portal. He's an expert on the Big 12, all over big stories that exist everywhere in the sport. So Max, thank you for joining us. You're our second guest ever on the Locked On Nebraska podcast.
I mean, that puts me on your guest Mount Rushmore.
It is. Oh. It is. You will forever be on the guest Mount Rushmore.
The second face as of now. Yeah.
One of your most frequent guests. Yeah. No, I appreciate y'all having me on. And enjoying the show, and excited to chat.
So want to jump right in. You are something of an expert on Matt Rhule because during his time at Baylor, from 2017 to 2019, you were around his team. You were based in Texas, covered him closely, and you've been around Matt Rhule and his program during his time, his year and a half in Lincoln. So I want to get your perspective on what you think of his progress heading into year 2 at Nebraska.
Yeah, I think that to me, just outside looking in, it feels like things are very on schedule in terms of the way that Matt Rhule and his coaching staff wanted to attack this job. Obviously, big difference in terms of what they took on in year 1 in Waco, and what came before them. And so, yeah, you knew they'd be more competitive in year 1 at Nebraska, and that it wouldn't necessarily be, necessarily a bottom to top kind of approach. But I think that, I think that it seems like just the vibes are good. Like, I think you can tell that this is not, I think you look at some of the indicators, especially nowadays when you look at these coaching staffs that are in year 1 and year 2, and a lot of people are kind of doing things the same way. You see a lot of like heavy roster turnover. You see a lot of like, all right, we're going to expedite this and get rid of all the guys we inherited, and this is going to look like our team very quickly. You see, and that's not just, Colorado and the obvious ones, but even like a Brent Venables at Oklahoma did the same thing. Like a lot of coaches are kind of flipping these things fast. And I think that you've seen for Nebraska to be on the low end in terms of roster attrition. It tells you that I think they like what they've got a little bit, and that they didn't feel like they inherited an awful culture and they needed to run everybody off. And I think when you have the big kind of future pieces like Dylan Raiola to point to and to build around, I think that turns up recruiting and will going forward. It seems like, you got the building coming soon, obviously. Like, it just kind of seems like all the pieces are kind of finally coming together in terms of positive momentum.
Max, I wanted to piggyback off that a little bit. Like, is there anything you see, because you were obviously very close in their time at Baylor. Is there anything that you see in the way that they've started to get this thing off the ground here that is discernibly, like, on the surface different from how they approach things at Baylor? Obviously, like you said, the situation was vastly different, but he in between then he had his time in the NFL. So I wonder kind of what you feel like might be different from his approach, if anything, that you notice.
Yeah, it's funny the way that things have played out the last few years. Like, I'm sure Matt Rhule came back to college football and was like, well, this is a little bit unrecognizable versus, end of 2019 in Baylor in terms of how much the sport has changed. But I would argue that his time in the NFL, successful or unsuccessful, prepared him quite a bit for what college football has become now. And when it comes to roster and basically cap management now, and trying to figure out how to build a successful team the right way in a much more transactional sport now. I think there's a difference there that is pretty impactful for him and for his coaching staff of understanding how to approach this while still giving this a college feel. I think that, certainly he's doing it with maybe some different people than he did in Baylor, but there's still a lot of familiar faces. There's still a lot of people who contributed to that build up, that they had in the Big 12. And so, I think there's obviously like a ton of confidence of like, I don't think he walks into this job and is like, oh no, this isn't what I thought it was. Like, I think they, that it's just going to be day to day, and in terms of just like very, very gradual, steady growth. And, I think you've seen that so far.
Hey, you mentioned the building that Nebraska is putting the finishing touches on, the $165 million Osborne Legacy Complex, as it is now officially called. And we got the chance in Lincoln yesterday to hear from Sean Padden, Nebraska's general manager, and from Susan Elza, the Matt Rhule's chief of staff, and learned that they are in now. The coaches and the staff are in on the third floor of the Osborne building. They've been operating out of the first floor for a while with the locker room and player development, player support offices, but now they're up on the coaching level, and pretty soon they'll have the second floor open, which is the training table and academic services. So in college football today, Max, as you've gone around places around the country, how much does something like this matter? Is it as much as it did, say, in the 90s when we had an all-out facilities race?
Many people are calling it the last good football building in college athletics, because because the way this is about to shift in terms of, okay, we do need to start sharing our revenue with student athletes here pretty soon. I think we can all tell that's where it's pointing here. I think those kinds of capital projects, everybody feels like they have to do them, and then once you do them a few years later, you're like, oh no, this is outdated, let's do it again. That's always kind of been the cycle in college athletics. I think that's probably going to change a little bit, because now the people who have been responsible for fundraising for projects like that, whether it's football facilities or stadium renovations or new stadiums, those people are going to be, I think, fairly soon tasked with fundraising for your roster and fundraising for giving the athletes their cut. So it's an interesting, it's a big achievement at a time when I think people are going to start to rethink some of those projects. And I think it's important. I remember when they first, just to tell you kind of the impact, I think, of that building, because you might say, okay, yeah, probably there's a lot of other schools out there, Big Ten and Power Five, playoff contenders who are building these things that are going to be seen and always elite. I remember when they first started putting out kind of mock-ups, like the designs of what this was going to look like, the first sort of the first images of here's what the plan is. I got texts from several people in the Big 12 who were like, oh crap, that's going to be big time. Like, there's the people who don't have that look at that and say like, oh man, they're set for a long time when they have that. So I think there's an impact in development. I think there's an impact in recruiting and that kind of stuff. And obviously made sense to, I mean, some of this stuff, as you guys know, just from the way the old setup was, like, this just makes a lot of sense too. So I think that's going to be, a big plus. And, especially when you get into, when they get some continuity in this thing and you're trying to compete for the best athletes in this region, I think that stuff matters.
Max Olson's with us on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Why don't we take our first break here real quick? We'll come back. I want to get into Max's huge story about Colorado castoffs and some other things when we return. But please remember to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB, or send us an email, lockedonneb@gmail.com. We'll be back after this.
All right, I want to take a minute and tell you about Gametime, a sponsor of the Locked On podcast. So, Connor, some people apparently, if you pay attention to the YouTube comments, think that we've been talking about the Royals too much on the Locked On Nebraska podcasts.
It's probably fair.
I don't know. If things continue the way they have through the first 40 games of the baseball season, we're going to be talking about the Royals a lot more. If they make the playoffs, like this is going to become a 50-50 split.
Wait, are they good this year?
Yeah, they are, Max. Great question. They are. Yes, I'd love to tell you all about it.
Yeah, I'll be getting down to Kansas City. I believe it's next weekend to see a game, and it's going to be a better experience because of Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets easier and faster. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. You've got all-in pricing, no fees at checkout. deals for specific zones of the stadium, flexible customer service. It is all there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Terms apply. Check it out at gametime.co. Download the Gametime app today. Lowest price guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. Once again, we're with Max Olson today of The Athletic. Max, it's been what, a couple weeks now since you put out the big Colorado story? Maybe I'm sure
it's
you've
been a week,
it.
But it feels like it's been a month. Yes,
you've probably talked about it 150 times since then. But it's a truly intriguing story as you went through and talked to each of the 53 people that were cast off of Deion Sanders, first roster basically at Colorado. We wanted to ask you about that because Nebraska does play Colorado in the second game of the season. There's some increasing buzz that might be a night game in Lincoln, which is really exciting.
So.
Yeah, I do too. What were some of the through lines that you saw with the people that you spoke with throughout the process of creating the story?
Yeah, it's something that I've wanted to kind of put together for the last year, really, once we saw this kind of all start to play out after Colorado spring game last year, because 53 scholarship players leaving in one offseason is unprecedented. It hasn't happened before or since in college in modern college football, and 20 guys being cut the day after the spring game is just something we haven't seen other people do. We see obviously people, first year coaches take this approach to to running guys off. That's not rare anymore, right? But wanted to talk to those players about just like what was, a year later, just what was that like? Because I think it was a big deal when it happened last spring, but you didn't really hear their voice in terms of like, hey, what was it like going through that? Not just that off season and that first spring with Coach Prime and his staff, but then what was it like going through the portal process, the place he ended up? Did it work out? And so it was really interesting to just connect with those players and just give them a chance to kind of tell their story. And, I was impressed by their maturity and their perspective a year later. Remember, these are guys that are, 19 to 23 or whatever. And, a few of them that got cut, they were at the end of their freshman year at Colorado. Like it was, and that freshman year was a time when, not only did they go 1-11, but their coach got fired after 5 games. So these kids went through a lot in a short period of time. And, I think as time passes, I didn't find that those kids like had, an agenda or like an extra grind or anything like that. I think that they, the bitterness kind of wears off over time. I think they're happy with where they ended up, even if it's not at another Power 5 school. And I think, was impressed that a bunch of them just kind of understood like, what, it's, college football is a business and that's how it goes. And you just got to, make the best of your situation. And I thought that was impressive in terms of their maturity. And then I think the thing that came up that all of them kind of individually brought up, and I think it is, we see it on the outside because we see Colorado puts everything on YouTube and on social media and stuff like that. For the players inside the building who signed up to play for Karl Dorrell, and kind of were going through this and this transition, they're very excited to play for Deion Sanders. All of them described it as like being on a reality TV show, that it was just like, this is, the cameras in their face all the time, the cameras in their meetings, the cameras in their little huddles in practice. You'd go home from practice and you'd see clips of your practice on YouTube right away. And, it's almost like, and then there are certain sort of stars that are being established and the rest of them kind of felt like they're maybe a little bit more like extras in the background. I think that part of it would be very strange. And it led to them kind of feeling like, man, this kind of feels like a tryout every day of like really having to try to get the head coach's attention.
One nugget that I found really interesting from that story is that not a single player from that 2023 recruiting class, Dorrell's last class, is still at Colorado. That's sometimes you may see like, hey, there's been 70% attrition, 80% attrition, but I believe it was 31 for 31 who are gone. That gives you a little bit of, I think, insight kind of behind the scenes just on what the environment has been there. And obviously there were some things about it that worked for Colorado in 2023. I mean, it started the season as the hottest team in the country. I'm interested in in some of this behind the scenes stuff, and you talked about the feel that it's a reality show every day. What was the process like for you in reporting this? And did you have any kind of communication with Colorado as you went through this, and any like cooperation there? And have you heard from anybody at Colorado like since this thing published?
No, there's been no response from Colorado on this stuff. Nobody has really like contested the details of the story at all. And that, the stuff that blew up on Twitter,
Yeah.
obviously that turned into a whole conversation that was not really about the contents of the story. It was about a couple quotes pulled out of it, and that all was surprising and unfortunate in a lot of ways. But I think that it was just making a list of these guys, figuring out where they are, and then just really reaching out to as many as I could, and just saying, hey, I want to talk about what you went through. I told them all, like, we can talk about Deion as much or as little as you want. I just want to, like, let's talk about what the last year was like. And I think that in having those conversations, these were not 10-minute interviews. A lot of them went over an hour because there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to break down and a lot of memories to kind of work through there for those guys. But I think it was like a little bit cathartic for them that somebody was asking them to kind of recount all of this, because I think it's there's obviously just kind of a culture of like kind of hey, keep it to yourself with this. You go in the portal, you're trying to find the place to go. Everything's very stressful and stuff. You're not really doing a whole round of interviews about, hey, here's what just went down. And so I think for those guys to be able to go through all that and have a little bit of time to process it, and then for someone to come back around and be like, hey, let's talk about that. I think a few of them, it seemed like they appreciated the chance to do that. And, I think the thing that strangely makes that story easier to put together is that there is that transparency of Colorado putting everything on YouTube. The players talked vividly about what their reaction to sitting in that first team meeting. Well, that first team meeting's on YouTube. You can go watch it yourself and see exactly what Deion Sanders said. There's no taking anything out of context. It's all out there. And so I think that helps a little bit in terms of the way that Deion Sanders has always talked about this stuff and has been very transparent from day one of like, I'm going to run guys out of here. We're going to get guys that I think fit my image for the program. And, I think he was, you can have your opinions on how that was all handled, but he did say from day one, that's how it was going to go.
Yeah. And there's literally an Amazon Prime documentary where you could see most of the
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They really are reality TV stars. Max, since you've become like Mr. Portal, I think, you're on top of everything. Give us a sense. Like, I think it's been really difficult for really anybody to kind of understand the talent that they've got and that they've lost. A lot of it is, sort of undefined, and they're just such a big question mark team based on what they have and what they've lost, all via the transfer portal. Like, give us a sense of, I guess, what their roster feels like to you, Colorado's, going into the second year. Obviously, it comes up because Nebraska and Colorado play each other in week 2, but like, give us a sense of what they lost and what they gained.
Yeah, so to put a number on it, I think they had this offseason 37 scholarship players transfer out, and picked up 38 or so to replace them all out of the portal. And they only signed 10 high schoolers in this cycle, so it's another extremely portal heavy approach. And honestly, guys, in talking to people in the personnel space, they feel like Colorado got better players this offseason than they did last year, and that probably makes sense given how many of those players that Colorado picked up a year ago have already moved on because they were just wearing backup roles that did not go the way that maybe they totally expected. I think Colorado got a better caliber of player probably overall. You're still taking guys that are depth guys. I think Colorado looks at it more as managing a 53 as opposed to an 85. And so you're trying to find just really impactful players. And that's what this is all being built toward. It's how good can Colorado get for 24? Because this is Shedur's last year in college. I think everybody understands that. And so that's the approach they've taken in recruiting for 2 years, is how good can we get this by year 2? And I think, but there's some of those spots. Like, I think they took some really good defensive linemen in the cycle. I think that they did, it seems like they've picked up good offensive linemen to fix what was an obvious problem for them a year ago. But it's like when you bring in a combined 17 transfers on the offensive and defensive lines, it's like, okay, that's a lot of new faces. That's a lot of competition. You've got to hit on those ones, obviously. There were some of those, I think Dylan Edwards leaving was a surprise. him going to K-State, that's a big pickup for Chris Kleiman. I don't think Cormani McClain leaving is really a surprise because that was a pretty rough freshman year. But I think a lot of the guys that left, they were probably okay with. Maybe there are some guys that left that wouldn't have left if we didn't have unlimited transfers now. But I think that Colorado will be improved this year. I think they feel like they've definitely got a bowl team, if not better. And so I think they will be a tougher challenge for Nebraska in some ways than they were last year in Boulder.
One final thought on this story, or about the subject of Colorado, and please go check out Max's story on The Athletic that published on April 29th. What happened to Deion Sanders' Colorado castoffs is the headline of that story. We did mention at the beginning of this segment that Nebraska, Colorado, or Colorado at Nebraska possibly is headed for a night slot on television. If Michigan, Texas is that day, and is going to get and
I think that one's already big noon, isn't it?
It is,
right.
yeah.
That's going to get the big noon treatment. So, what you've been around Memorial Stadium a ton. What would that look like? Colorado and Deion Sanders coming into Nebraska at night in week 2.
So I think we're probably talking biggest home game since Ohio State in 19. Would you guess?
Ooh,
The lead up to it, at least.
college game day.
Because that was game day. That was a big build up day to a big
when
night
they
game.
announced their facility.
That's right. That's right. With Wan'Dale Robinson repping the players that day. Yep.
And Bill Booth and Scott Frost.
A long time ago. And then Ohio State took the field, and you're like, holy crap, is this the best Big Ten team of all time? Like they were so sick. Like Fields and Chase Young and Okuda and those guys that went off. So I feel like is that probably the last like home game of this magnitude? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, and that one was just over before it started. Yeah,
I think Michigan 21 was
yes,
about that.
Yes, I wasn't at that one. I heard that atmosphere was phenomenal, wasn't it?
Yeah, this feels like it could be bigger if we continue to get the build up this summer. I think.
I mean, that wasn't a night game. If you're talking about night, I mean, right? You go back to Miami, perhaps.
Michigan 21 was a night game.
Michigan was a night game. Remember they did the end of third quarter.
Yeah, I seem to remember it getting dark as that happened, but that might just be my fuzzy memory. So
let me tell you guys something. Ever since this story came out, I have learned. I have a lot of firsthand experience here on how Colorado folks feel about Nebraskans, because there was a lot of response of people being like, I went to his LinkedIn. He went to Nebraska. This is a hit piece. So I was very much reminded of the hatred towards Nebraska, and also just a lot of people who point to the story because they don't like Colorado too. And so it was interesting to be in the middle of all that for a week. The intensity of that game, pregame, in game, like I think it's just it's going to be ratcheted up another level from last year, which you had the pregame hijinks and stuff. I think there's going to be hard hits. I think there's going to be I think it's going to be a very aggressive game, no matter what happens. Obviously Colorado's got to play North Dakota State week 1, and that one will be pretty interesting. But I think that is going to be one of the most hate-filled non-conference games of the year. There's no question.
Yeah.
Yep. We'll take a quick time out. I want to get into one or two more things with Max. Before we do so, we'll remind you that Locked On Sports Today is here for you, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, another quick time out to talk about Monopoly Go. That's right. We're talking about Monopoly Go again, Mitch. We've become obsessed with Monopoly Go. I want to be the top hat or the car. Max, what's your favorite piece in Monopoly Go or in Monopoly? There's like a bicycle. I think you're the bicycle. We'll make you the bicycle.
That's
exactly right. There's just so much fun to be had in Monopoly Go. You can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build each other's boards. Then the more you work together, the more you can win and the more awesome prizes you can unlock. You get to make unique stickers to trade, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, like Max is now the bicycle, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or when you heist their vaults. Monopoly Go features constantly changing tournaments and challenges. You can try their mini games like digging for treasures, and there's always new events that help you win big. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. Get off the bench, download it now. It's Monopoly Go, free on the Google Play or the App Store.
Quick final segment here with Max Olson joining us from The Athletic. A couple topics of national interest that I wanted to ask you about. First, the portal, because you are the caretaker of The Athletic's best available list in the transfer portal. By the way, Nebraska is set to get a visit early next week from Jaden Mangum, the Michigan State DB, who's on the market, viewed as one of the top players out there. He's also visiting Michigan and Ohio State, if that tells you anything about Mangum. But the portal, Max, is it out of hand in college football, or is this just the reality of things moving forward and we just have to get used to it?
Well, I think obviously coaches and administrators have been trying to put off this unlimited transfers for as long as possible, and now that's over. I mean, unlimited transfers are happening. I think what we saw in this spring window was that about, by my count, close to 30% of the guys that transferred were guys that had already transferred before in their career, and that's just going to continue. I think this cycle so far that started in August, I think we're up 20% in terms of scholarship transfers. And so that number goes up every year, and it's making a big jump again this year. So this is how it goes. When you go through and look at like the Power 5 teams, I think the average attrition this year was like 18 or 19 scholarship players. So obviously Nebraska is on the very low end of that. There's only a few schools that have lost fewer players than Nebraska. And so, this is just how it is. This is how roster building goes. It is difficult. And you're just seeing more and more programs, especially early on, that are rebuilding, are just going to go very heavy on portal just to make them a little bit better. And I think that this is you got to accept it. You don't have to be a big spender in all this stuff, but you do have to understand that you're gonna have to fight for retention every year.
Hey Max, there's only one guy who doesn't seem to have accepted this, and it's Dabo Swinney. Why they have taken 0 transfers? How is that possible in this day and age? Like, what you have to at least supplement your roster in some way. That seems impossible to me.
Yeah, when you talk to other coaches, even the ones that maybe don't want to be fishing from the portal all the time, I think there is a recognition over time now, not only that your opponents are getting better through the transfer portal, and that is certainly the case in the ACC, but when you lose guys to the transfer portal, when you lose a sophomore or a junior to the portal, even if it's a guy that isn't playing that much and just wants more playing time, if you just are always replacing the guys you lose with freshmen, over time, you're just going to get a little bit worse. And maybe I completely understand all the cultural reasons why Dabo Swinney stays out of it. But I mean, you look at what Brent Venables did. He left Clemson. He went to Oklahoma. He's gone very heavy on the portal, and he got it flipped in year 2. Like, I think if Dabo Swinney were starting over somewhere, he would take a different approach. I think he feels like this is the way he's got to do it to hold on to the magic that he's got inside his locker room. But if Clemson decided to flip the switch and say, we recruit the portal now, they would be really good players that would want to go to Clemson. So, yep. I mean, why wouldn't you, with the draft picks and the championships and the facilities and all that stuff that they have? And so, he's continues to resist. And, we will see if some of these programs like Miami and Florida State that do invest heavily in terms of talent acquisition in the portal, surpass them this season.
One final question for you, Max. In the portal, it goes hand in hand with NIL. You don't have one in its current state without the other. The current trajectory and the rising price to get an elite transfer, it's going up and up every year. So I feel like it's unsustainable, that there's going to have to be a change to the system. What do you think happens with NIL in the 1 to 2 years ahead of where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I think, if there's a future that involves collective bargaining, and I think people are expecting that will be the case here not too long from now, then that's going to change the marketplace. And I think that's the kind of the funny thing is, you talk to coaches and administrators, I think they understand that's where it's going. I think they're increasingly becoming comfortable with that concept, which they weren't for a long time. But it's funny. I think the way things are right now, you can call it Wild West and say it's out of control and all that kind of stuff, but it's a pretty good deal for the on the coaching side. It's a pretty good deal on the athletic department side, that some guys are going to be way overpaid. There's going to be more movement than you want, and you want more control to all this stuff. But I think the free market approach so far, I don't think has gotten too crazy. We haven't seen a team just go out and buy a national championship. So, this is all changing. Like I said, I think that these things are going to go in-house sooner than people think. And when that's the case, it's going to completely change the compensation setup. And so right now, I think you saw some guys, especially like some defensive linemen in the spring window, are like, all right, I'm going to go in the portal and I'm going to get paid while I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Max. Well, we appreciate you doing this. Thanks for stopping by. We look forward to anything in the hopper right now. Anything you're working on?
Got a lot working on. I think the next thing we got, the big one, is the annual re-rank of the recruiting classes 4 years later. And
one of my favorite pieces of the year.
It'll be the class of 2020, and I can tell you Nebraska is not in the top 25 in that one. Someday Nebraska will fare well in that grading, but it hasn't happened lately.
Yeah, might have to wait another couple of years. Yeah, not 2020, that's for sure. Thanks for doing this, Max. We really appreciate it.
Hey, my
Thanks
pleasure.
so much.
Anytime.
All right, for Max Olson and for Mitch Sherman, I'm Connor Happer signing off and reminding you that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's available on the Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the free Fire TV channels app.